Education is not simply a process of transferring knowledge, but a journey of developing whole people, those who think, feel, and behave for the common good. We believe that every light, a light that illuminates the path of knowledge, guiding generations towards a more meaningful future. The establishment of the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education at Sriwijaya University began with the formation of the Preparatory Committee for the establishment of FKIP Palembang on the 7th of June 1960, chaired by R.A. Rani. On the 13th of June 1961, through decree of the Minister of Higher Education and Science, number 6 of 1961, the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education officially became part of Sriwijaya University. The Faculty of Teacher Training and Education at Sriwijaya University has 5 campuses. Indralaya campus, Kilometer 5 campus, Ogan campus, Bukit campus, and Jakabaring campus. Currently, the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education of Sriwijaya University has 23 study programs consisting of 15 undergraduate programs, 5 master's programs, 2 doctoral programs, and 1 teacher professional education program. Several of these programs have been accredited by LAMDIC, ASEAN, and AQUAS. Vision of the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education Sriwijaya University is to become a leading research-based faculty that excels in the fields of science, teaching, and education.
We are committed to becoming a leading faculty with internationalization programs in collaboration with various universities, both domestically and internationally. Here, education is interpreted as a calling of the heart to shape character, foster empathy, and ignite a spirit of lifelong learning. We instill that values of scholarship, humanity, and service so that every faculty, teacher, and training education Sriwijaya University graduate becomes not only a teacher but also pioneer of change and a value of truth. Because we believe that education is an eternal legacy.
To improve the quality of education, Training and Education Sriwijaya University maintains various cited by SINTA and Scopus. The development of meaningful international collaboration networks is ongoing. Through cross-border collaboration, we create space for the exchange of knowledge, culture, and innovation that enriches the learning experience and broadens the horizon of our academic community. Deakin University, Australia. Utah, USA. Utrecht University, the Netherlands. University Teknologi Malaysia. University Kebangsaan Malaysia. Sultan Al Bolkiah Institute of Education, University Brunei Darussalam, Philippines Normal University, University Pendidikan Sultan Idris, Capiz State University, Philippines. Various facilities are also developed to support learning activities and scientific development. Students are agents of change and the future. Through enthusiasm, creativity, and dedication, they not only gain knowledge in classes, but also achieve success and make real contributions to society. The Faculty of Teacher Training and Education is the birthplace of educator leaders of the nation. This is where the spirit of learning, innovation, and service grows together in various academic and non-academic activities. Forum, or Forum of Leaders of Public Faculties of Teacher Training and Education across Indonesia. Sriwijaya University Learning and Education International Conference, or SULE-IC. FKIP Sharing and Reciting, PKKMB. Various other activities. The Faculty of Teacher Training and Education is committed to continuously producing educators who are superior, have characters, and are globally in accordance with our tagline: reputation, relevant, elaborate, superior, trustworthy, and inspiring. Yeah, I can hear you clearly. I
Oh,
don't know from Veronica. I remember.
Hello, it's nice to meet you. I can hear you now. This is Gregory.
Okay, good. Thank you.
all right, great. Then we can start.
Your speaker is not good. Sorry.
Check. 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 Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, the Honorable Director of Universitas Sriwijaya, Professor Taufik Marwa, or his representative, the Dean of the Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Associate Professor Hartono, the Vice Dean for Academic Affairs, Students Affairs, and Quality Assurance, Associate Professor Rita Indrawati, the Vice Dean for Planning, Finance, Resources, Procurement, and Logistics, Dr. Didi Jayasantri, the Vice Dean for Research, Community Service, Innovations, Downstream Development, Collaborations, Internationalizations, and Alumni Relations, Professor Ratu Ilma. The Honorable Speaker, Dr. Amber Warren, the heads and secretaries of the Department of Language and Art Education, Professor Sonny Mirizan, all heads and secretaries of department, the coordinators of the master program in language education, as well as the head of the public lecture committee, Ibu Sari Silviani, all coordinators of study programs, distinguished guests, all lecturers, and students both on-site and online. Welcome to today's public lecture on Designing for Attunement and Actions in Language Teacher Education, Multimodality, and Critical Multilingual Approaches. I'm Chofifa Musliha, and I will guide you through today's program. Before we continue to the program, I would like to share a traditional Indonesian pantun. Well, the morning breeze feels fresh and bright. Today we gather in joyful raya. We are delighted to share this light. Welcome Dr. Warren to Bumi Sriwijaya. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, to begin our program, let us stand together to sing the Indonesian national anthem, Indonesia Raya. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise. Please be seated. Next, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a moment of prayer. I kindly invite Sir Muhammad Yazir. To Bapak Yazir, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In this occasion, before we begin, with your permission, I will lead this prayer in the Islamic traditions. For the participants of other faiths and beliefs, we respectfully invite you to pray according to your own faiths and convictions. A'udzubillahi minasyaitonirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Hamdan syakirin, hamdan na'imin, hamda yuafi ni'mika mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu kama yanbaghi li wajhikal karim wa sultanik. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ajmain. O Allah, Lord of the universe, all praise belongs to you for the opportunity to gather in this public lecture, designing attunement and action in the language teacher educations, multimodality and critical multilingual approaches. O merciful Lord, bless this event and open our hearts and minds to receive beneficial knowledge, broaden our understanding, and strengthen our dedication to education and language teaching. Grant us wisdom, creativity, and compassion so that we may become educators who inspire, empower, and bring positive impact to others. Unite us in the spirit of learning, collaboration, and service for the advancement of education and humanity. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azabannar. Amin ya rabbal alamin. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for leading the prayer. Ladies and gentlemen, for documentation purposes, we kindly invite all key participants to a group photo. The documentations and publications team will assist. Please gather here for the photo sessions. For participants joining online, we kindly ask you to turn on your cameras. Okay, everyone, please open your cameras and give your best smile. Okay, thank you, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, now we will hear the welcoming speech from the chair of the event organizing committee, as well as the coordinator to Dr. Sari. The time is yours.
Thank you, FIFA, for the opportunity. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone, and good evening to Amber. It is truly a pleasure to welcome you all to today's talk, Designing for Attunement and Action in Language Teacher Education, multimodality, and critical multilingual approaches. It is also a pleasure for me to introduce today's speaker, someone whom I have had the privilege to know not only as a respected scholar and educator, but also as a thoughtful colleague and friend. I have always appreciated the way her work brings intellectual rigor together with genuine care for people, communities, and educational practice. And I think today's talk reflects that beautifully. This presentation invites us to think about language teacher education as a form of design work, the intentional creation of learning experiences that help teachers notice, interpret, and respond to the ideological dimension of language in social life. Through projects involving linguistic landscape inquiry and multimodal sociodrama, we will see how prospective teachers engage critically with questions of language, power, identity, and social justice across science, spaces, bodies, and relationships. What I find especially compelling about this work is its emphasis on attunement, not only to language itself, but also to the lived experiences and social realities that language both reflects and shapes. In many ways, this talk challenges us to imagine teacher education as a space for critical awareness, ethical engagement, and meaningful action. I believe we are in for a rich and inspiring conversation today. Thank you very much for those who comes today in this room as well as in online. I hope you will enjoy it. And again, thank you for Amber to give us generous time to share her work. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, next we are honored to invite the Vice Dean 1 of FKIP Universitas Sriwijaya, Dr. Rita Indrawati, to deliver her remarks and officially open this event.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible? Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. The Honorable Rector of Sriwijaya University, Professor Dr. Taufik Mawarwah, SA, MSc, the Honorable the Dean of Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Dr. Harto, MA, the Honorable here, I can see here that one of our colleagues from Technocrat University Lampung, the Dean of Technocrat University Lampung, Dr. Heri Kuswoyo, thank you for your coming, Heri. I also see someone from Teflin, Dr. Amrin Saragagi, thank you, Doctor. The beloved senior lecturers, Professor Huzaimah and Professor Dimra, thank you, you always support us in our study program. I also would like to send my gratitude to all the lecturers, seniors and also junior from English education. Also to the students of English master's program of English language education. And I can see here that some from undergraduate program. Well, distinguished speaker, Dr. Amber, sorry if it is mispronounced, Dr. Amber and Warren from Vanderbilt University, USA. First of all, I would like to express our gratitude to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for His blessings, allowing us to gather here virtually and also offline in that place, in our campus, for this international public lecture organized by master's program of language education, Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas Sriwijaya, also in collaboration with Teflin Sumpaksa. On behalf of Dean of FKIP Universitas Sriwijaya, I would like to warmly welcome and express our sincere appreciation to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Amber N. Warren, Associate Professor of Practice in Multilingual Education at Vanderbilt University, USA. Well, it is truly an honor for us and privilege also to have you, Dr. Warren, in this academic forum. We know that Vanderbilt University is internationally recognized as one of the leading leading institution in education and research. And Dr. Warren herself is widely known for her expertise in multilingual education. I forget critical pedagogies, teacher education, and inclusive learning. Yeah, it is new for us, but yeah, long time ago, inclusive learning has been done in some university and some schools. Dr. Warren's work has contributed significantly to discussion on how language education can become more equitable, culturally responsive, and socially transformative. We believe that her presence today will provide valuable insights and global perspective to all participants, especially in understanding how multimodality and critical multilingual approaches can enrich language teacher education in today's diverse educational landscape. So today's theme, Designing for Attunement and Action in Language Teacher Education, is highly relevant to current educational challenges. So we see here, in today's interconnected and digital world, language education is no longer limited to grammar and linguistic competence alone. Teachers are now expected to develop critical awareness, intercultural understanding, and multimodal literacy. Also the last one that is very important is inclusive learning environment that respect multilingual and multicultural identities. And this public lecture also reflects our faculty's commitment toward internationalization and academic excellence. So Sriwijaya University, for you to know, continues its transformation to become PTNBH, sorry in English, legal entity state university. So it is international collaboration, global academic networking, reputable publication, also internationally recognized academic standard become increasingly important for us. Also, of course, to our faculty. So it is in line with our vision also that continuously strengthen our academic quality and global engagement. Our STEM program, Master Programs of Language Education, has been achieving international accreditation from Aquas, Germany, and it is part of our commitment to global standard. Not only language education, but also mathematics education has also reached the international accreditation. Well, we love that now Universitas Sriwijaya has gained increasingly international recognition based on the THE, Time Higher Education ranking, the field of education. So it is new for us, new also for everybody at Sriwijaya University. We place ranking 600 for education, because of the research, because of teaching environment, research productivity, international outlook, and also societal impact on education. For us, becoming ranking globally is not merely a number. It showed that Universitas Sriwijaya increasingly recognized as a competitive institution at the international level. Well, ladies and gentlemen, so today guest lecture also remind us that sustainability in education is not only about technology or infrastructure, but also sustaining inclusive, equitable, and also transformative learning practices. So the concept of multimodality and critical multilingualism discussed today will encourage all educators, all the students to become more adaptive, empathic, and also responsive to diverse learners in today's global society. Therefore, I encourage all participants to actively engage in this session, exchange ideas, and maximize this valuable opportunity to learn from international expertise, Dr. Warren. Finally, I would like to express my appreciation to Master's Program in Language Education and Teflin Sumbaksel for organizing this meaningful event. May this collaboration continues to grow and contribute significantly to the advancements of education, particularly language teacher education in Indonesia and beyond. Well, by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I officially open the guest lecturer with the topic Designing for Attunement and Action in Language Teacher Education. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Rita Indrawati, to deliver the remarks and officially open this event. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now come to the main sessions. The keynote speaker is Dr. Amber Warren from Vanderbilt University, USA. The topic will be Designing for the Attunement and Actions in Language Teacher Education's Multimodality and Critical Multilingual Approaches. Our moderator, Dr. Fitria Aprilia. We now hand over the sessions entirely to our moderator. To Dr. Aprilia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Master Apsaramani. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, dear all participants on site, and good evening for Dr. Amber Warren. Okay, the Honorable Rector of Universitas Sriwijaya, Professor Dr. Taufik Marwah, SAMSE, or his representative, the Dean of Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Associate Professor Dr. Hartono, MA, the Vice Dean for Academic Affairs, Students Affairs, and Quality Assurance, Associate Professor Dr. Rita Indrawati, MPD, our honorable speaker, Associate Professor Dr. Amber and Warren. Thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Warren. We are so privileged to have such an outstanding scholars and educator joining us from Vanderbilt University, USA. The Honorable Heads and Secretaries of Departments of Language and Arts Education, Prof. Sony Mirizon, and also Dr. Ernalida, the coordinators of Master Program in Language Education, as well as the head of the Public Lecture Committee, Dr. Sari Silviani, all distinguished guests, all lecturers, and all beloved students, both on-site and online. It is truly an honor for me to serve as a moderator for today's public lecture organized by the Master's Program in Language Education, Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, Universitas Sriwijaya. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, please allow me to introduce our distinguished speaker, Amber and Warren. So, Dr. Warren is an associate professor of the practice in multilingual education in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Vanderbilt University, USA. She earned her doctorate degree from Indiana University and has extensive international teaching experience, such as in Thailand, South Korea, and Tennessee in the United States. In her research, Dr. Warren employs qualitative methods to explore how the teachers make sense of educational policies and also pedagogical approaches that shapes their professional practices. She is also particularly interested in intersections of media and policy in the lives of educators and language learners. Well, now, talking about her academic and scholarly contributions, there are many that have been published in numerous internationally reputable journals, including Teaching and Teacher Education, Language and Education, Linguistics and Education, Classroom Discourse, Critical Discourse Analysis, and also Journal of Education Policy. In addition, Dr. Warren is the co-editor of several influential academic books, such as Activism in Language Teaching and Language Teacher Education, published by Bloomsbury in 2024, and then Toward Equitable Futures in Online Language Teacher Education, Designing for Criticality, Dialogism, and Advocacy, forthcoming with the writer, and then Language Teacher Educators at a Crossroad, exploring the intersections of identity, emotions, and agency, forthcoming with Routledge. So today, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Warren will deliver a lecture with the theme Designing for Attunement and Action in Language Teacher Education, Multimodality and Critical Multilingual Approaches. So we are truly honored and delighted to have this opportunity to learn from her valuable expertise and also inspiring experiences today. So please join me in warmly welcoming our speaker. Without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Warren.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Salam alaikum. I want to thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the rector, to the deans of faculty, to Dr. Indirawati, to Dr. Silviani, and to everyone who has been so generous with their time already to come and join us today. I'm very excited to get to share with you some of my recent work. I'm going to get my slides up and then I'll talk to you about what I'm here to share with you today. Let's make sure it's working. All right. Can you see my slides? It looks like you can.
Yes, crystal clear.
And they're changing. Okay, perfectly. All right, wonderful. So today I'm going to talk about two recent projects that fit together under my interests in helping teacher education prepare teachers and then teachers of learners, of English learners, who are oriented toward attunement and action and are ready to engage critically in multilingually, even in an English teaching classroom. So I want to share a little bit about how I got started in this work. I know you mentioned that I taught in several different places. These are some of my students that you see here in Tennessee. We did a measurement unit, and the students are tracing their shadows, and then we measured ourselves, our hands, our fingers, our noses, all these parts of our body, and we wrote the links of the parts onto the shadows. And then they wrote about themselves and who they were as learners and as people. And so I've always been sort of interested in multimodal things, even when I was a classroom teacher. And I think that joy that I saw with students who were able to express themselves through English, by having opportunities to engage through different modes of representation, I think has carried on into my teacher education space as well. So today I want to talk about two recent projects that have explored how language teacher education can prepare teachers only to understand ideas about multilingualism and identity and justice, but also to use these ideas in practice, looking at linguistic landscape and looking at multimodal sociodrama. But first, I want to frame these questions through a broader question. How do we as teachers or as language teacher educators develop our capacity to see ourselves as agentive designers of multilingual, relational, and just classroom ecologies? So as you know, the work of ELT is situated within a wide range of issues that we have to navigate and things that we work with. We have curriculum, we have textbooks, we have assessments, we have testing pressures, especially achievement tests to get into colleges and universities. We have pressures related to English in terms of the global use of English as a language, but also the pressures that come with English, like hegemonically. We have institutional histories, hierarchies of language and power and traditions related to which languages or ideas should be centered in schools. And this has been true in different ways in every place that I have had the opportunity to work and engage. Here in the US, we have our own traditions and histories and pressures to teach students to learn English so that they can, graduate from schools and work in a society. When I worked in Thailand, we had different pressures related to English as a global language. And so everywhere I've been, this has been an experience. Well, we are always treated as teachers, as implementers, right, of the curriculum. We are prepared to follow the curricula, to prepare students for assessments, meet our institutional expectations. And all of that is true. And yet also, we are still constantly making decisions. We make decisions about language, what language is visible in our classrooms, what language is audible, what languages are spoken in our classrooms, what kinds of participation we invite our students to engage with, what kinds of identities our students are allowed to bring into the classroom, what forms of expression count, and how to respond when ideas are levied by our students, both equitable and inequitable. And so my starting point is that these decisions are the work of teaching, even within these complex contexts. So I want to talk about, as English language teachers, at whatever level we're working at, whether we're the teacher, whether the teacher educator, we're cultivating relational agency for multilingual possibility. And so I use that term to emphasize that we're not acting alone or outside of our contexts, that we act with our students, with our colleagues, with our families, with the materials, with our textbooks, with our policies, with our cultural histories, with our constraints. And I use the idea of multilingualism to emphasize that our multilingual students and our multilingual selves are not an add-on even in English language teaching. It's part of the ordinary life of our classrooms. And it shapes our belonging and our students' belonging, our participation, our identities, and our access. And this involves a range of practices that include noticing what is happening with language, with identity, with participation, with students' emotions, with our own emotions and belonging, then naming what we see, what ideas and ideologies and histories or assumptions are shaping the particular moment when we notice these things. Then asking ourselves, what could be otherwise? What small shifts might matter here? And imagining possible changes. Then we can act on those changes through principled moves with our students, with our colleagues, with our co-teachers, with the families or the communities in which our schools are situated, before returning again to reflect on what we have done, what has changed, what new linguistic possibilities have been made available, and then plan again for what we might engage the next time, knowing that we're changed and that also our classroom ecology has changed through the act that we have engaged in of paying attention and imagining and making small changes. So I'm going to talk today through two pedagogical examples. The first is a linguistic landscape study, and then the second is going to be the multimodal sociodrama. So I'll tell you a little bit about multimodal sociodrama when we get there, but just to kind of foreshadow, it's an activity in which you rehearse a conversation by fictionalizing and embodying what it can feel like to respond to a situation related to English language teaching. We're going to start with linguistic landscapes, which invite students, teachers, educators to examine the language ecologies around them and what languages are visible and absent and centered and marginalized, and what those arrangements can communicate. So we're going to focus in there first. So first, what do linguistic landscape assignments support? They invite us as teachers, teacher educators, or they invite our students in our schools into noticing language in the environment in a purposeful way. We can deliberately ask our students, ourselves, to notice what is visible, what is absent, what is repeated, what is translated or not translated, and what becomes highlighted or hidden as a result of those choices, whether intentional or unintentional. And then we can invite ourselves and our students to identify what these particular linguistic arrangements communicate about the people who belong in that space, about what might be considered legitimate uses of language in that space, about who has access, who's granted access, who has power. And then we can imagine accordingly. We can plan and enact small shifts toward creating classrooms where multilingualism might be ordinary and visible and meaningful as a resource, even for learning the target language. So even in an English language classroom, how do all the other languages become visible, matterful, and important? So I'm going to talk about a study that I did where we use linguistic landscape with teachers in 3 different university settings, pre-service teachers. So setting 1 is in the US. It is a general education class for multilingual pre-service teachers. So that means they were teachers who were pursuing license in subject areas like math or English or science or social studies here in the US, but they were learning about how to support multilingual learners in those content classrooms. US Context 2 is an English as a second language teaching methods course. There were a number of undergraduate and MA students in that class. They were going to be reading teachers, ESL teachers, and also some subject area teachers. So again, math, social studies, science, history, those kinds of things. And our third context comes from Turkey. It is an English as a foreign language theory course. The focus was on sociolinguistics, and there were 60 undergraduate students in that course who are all English as a foreign language teaching majors. And we implemented this pedagogical design across all 3 of these contexts. And the numbers of students are the students who agreed to participate because we have IRB consent for this study. So there were more students in the classes, but these are the ones who've agreed to allow us to share their work for our research. So in this assignment, we invited students to spend 2 to 3 hours exploring a neighborhood, a classroom, a school space of their choosing, and take notes and take photographs on what they noticed. So we gave them guiding questions that were similar across all 3 contexts. We asked them to engage in notice and naming by asking questions like, what do you see? What is depicted? What actions or processes are shown? How are the elements arranged in the space? And then what relationships engage or exist between them? We then asked them, once they had collected all of these data, to interpret what they had collected. So to start to make theorizations based on what they noticed drawing on the readings and the research that we'd done in our classroom and their understanding about practices for teaching in their content area, and also their understanding for practices for teaching English and for teaching English learners. So we talked about what ideas or beliefs about language are communicated by the linguistic arrangements and the signs that you see. What languages are prominent, what languages may be less visible, what is not there at all. And then we ask them to make some conclusions, again, based on their research and their understanding and the things we've been reading and discussing in class, about what is communicated through the ideas and beliefs, the ideologies that they identified. We asked them to focus on how the materials affected their interpretations of the spaces and how they understood them to in turn reflect or contest ideas about linguistic diversity, linguistic pluralism, and inclusion of multilingualism in the classroom or in the space that they engaged in looking through. We use this to support the teachers engaging in this three-part process, and then ask them to reflect on what they had learned and what this meant for them and how they might plan for their future classroom and their responsibility for multilingualism in those contexts. So I'm going to show you a little bit about some of the places that they went and the data that they collected. So in US 1, which is an urban context, the teacher education students visited university libraries, middle school libraries and public schools, local museums, school websites, international services offices at the university, and other sites like this. You can see they collected a range of data from these different sites. Our US Rural 2 context visited very similar sites, middle schools, elementary schools, classrooms, school websites, public libraries, museums. And then in Turkey, they visited school sites, but they also additionally visited a number of streets. They visited restaurants, shops, and city train systems. And each data set was analyzed collaboratively by us as the researchers in author dyads to develop initial noticings and interpretations across participants' work. We tried to attend to their multiple layers of meaning making. We tried to attend to what they noticed in the text, the discourse, and the social practices. We looked at how they talked about what they saw and who they said it was for. We looked at how they named circulating discourses like diversity, accessibility, and tokenism. And then we looked at how they interpreted these ideas related to processes of reproduction of English hegemony or multilingualism or English as a global language, including legitimation or silencing of different languages in different parts, focusing on how they noticed this and then articulated their ideas about actions and responsibilities for these spaces in relation to the linguistic conditions. And we found that participants highlighted the value of different languages on display. They noticed linguistic proximity and they highlighted its value for inclusivity, but they also began to trouble the idea of language presence, meaning equality, right? Like language is not always just because it's there, doesn't mean someone has equal access. We also noticed they talked a lot about the idea of symbolic capital, and they talked about linguistic hierarchies, which language was above literally, physically one another, and which language like stood out more because of that. And we also noticed that they began to brainstorm solutions for how they might re-envision the space to be more equitable and just, and to consider larger questions of advocacy for multilingualism in the space. So first, we talk about discourses of accessibility and inclusion, looking at the idea of language presence and the value of language and language as a usability feature. So the signs noticed by our participants across both the US contexts and the Turkish context the students talked about the presence of language, whether it was English or an additional language, whether that was Turkish in the case of Turkey, which is their native language, or whether it was also a third additional language, such as Russian in the case of Turkey, how those language presence equaled for the participants. They noticed how it made it more available to the users of the space, how it signaled to participants, to the people in that space who might use those languages at home, that this would be a space where they would feel welcome. They argued that it created inclusion because it offered multiple opportunities for people to see themselves in the space. You can see we have American Sign Language along with English, as well as we have the Russian and the English and the Turkish in Turkey. The participants also talked about this in terms of digital spaces. They noticed that web pages, although they might default to English, they would have capabilities of translating the web page. They looked at the varieties of languages you could translate, but then they also started to notice that sometimes just the ability to translate may not equal accessibility. So translation might equal presence, but it may not fully be usable for the participants who would want to use that space. So for example, Laura here from the US Context 2 talks about how even though it is a translatable website, the translation button might be hard to locate if you were unfamiliar with the website, that she couldn't be certain about the translation quality of the website because she unfortunately was not a speaker of all 200 languages. And that if text was in the images themselves, the text in the images did not get translated. And so, whereas before she remarked as how she would have thought this was accessible to people who wanted to register their child in the school district, she realized after using this lens of linguistic landscape to investigate the website, in fact, it was more complicated than that. And maybe all of the things that were appeared to her to be inclusive maybe didn't always equal accessibility. It's a very interesting realization. We, we also found that they highlighted the role of English in particular in branding and the role of English as playing a prestige language, particularly in the multilingual context of Turkey. And they noticed that they began to not just talk about how it could be prestige, but also the role that it plays in power and capital as a symbolic element, which was an interesting observation and critique. And then we also noticed that they explicitly began to implicate the role of power and hegemony, like we talked about at the beginning, where participants started to notice beyond space. For example, this read sign appears to have a number of different languages on it. But then this student, Kathleen from the US 1 context, says she thought again about this language and how English is so much larger in the word read that it may unintentionally promote English over multilingualism, even while appearing to be multilingual. And so that even while she doesn't blame the librarians for this, and she thinks that this is intentional design, trying to be inclusive, that linguistic hierarchies are just so well entrenched in our practice that it's hard to even notice them, even when you intentionally design a space to become multilingual, which is a very complex and nuanced observation for a pre-service teacher to begin to notice. So by inviting them into linguistic landscape analysis, their noticing goes much deeper. They begin to name, and then they also begin to identify and imagine toward future action. So in this example, participant Jordan, he noticed a bunch of multilingual and multicultural posters in a middle school where he went to conduct his analysis. And he thought this was a great representation for the large amount of the student body, but he noted that it didn't quite represent everybody in the school because the multilingual students didn't always come from the same background, and so they may not feel as included. He also noted that it was all in English, and so again, it may be less inclusive for students. So he discussed the possibility of including posters that included more languages on them, that included heroes from the different cultures as well. These are all heroes from African American context, and he thought they could have heroes from the multilingual students context as well. But he more importantly talked about how he couldn't do this by going in and solving this by himself. He needed to work with the teachers and the students in the space in order to understand that space and understand the program and the needs of the participants in order to really make the changes that would be meaningful in that context. So it's a really rich and nuanced thinking about how his ideas about ideologies developed beyond just noticing and naming, and even beyond imagining, toward understanding how to engage in these kinds of actions as a relationship with the people who use the space day to day, which is an important observation that he talked about wanting to carry forward in his reflection into his future classroom. So, what this study shows us is the ways that ideological clarity or understanding about linguistic hierarchies and beliefs about English in these spaces emerge through teachers' acts of positioning and evaluating and reasoning as they notice and name and imagine and work in relation with the others in the space. And that they then start to move toward advocacy, which itself is a type of ideological action that demonstrates commitment that emerges through constant conversation or discourse with the community. So this kind of work may not be perfect, and it may be small and may take time, but it matters because these teachers will have literal material effects in the spaces where they work, and they will make change, and their students will see themselves in the space in a more inclusive and community-oriented way, which in turn will make them feel more comfortable in the classroom and be able to then learn more comfortably the content that they're there to teach. So, analyzing the linguistic landscape helps the teachers, in this case, pre-service teachers, move from seeing the space to designing for the classroom ecologies we want. And these are questions that we as teachers can then ask ourselves as teacher educators, as we're thinking about how to design our own teacher education spaces, but also as classroom teachers, as we're thinking about setting up the classrooms where we work. So what languages and modes are already a part of this classroom ecology? What languages do I see in my textbooks, in my signs? What languages do I hear in the morning and then announcements? What languages are missing and minimized? What languages are treated as decorative, like in the read sign that my student looked at? What messages do the students receive about whose language belongs here? And what messages might I convey by making small shifts that could make participation and inclusion more expansive? So in turn, students may be open to making those connections between the languages and identities that they bring and the English language that I'm here to teach, right? And then how can students, as our co-designers, even become analysts or designers of the space with us and participate in creating a truly multilingual classroom while we learn the target language or the target content, whether it's math or science or social studies. So, while linguistic landscape help teachers ask what is being communicated here and what could be otherwise, multimodal sociodrama helps teachers ask what can I say or do, and how might it feel, and how can I act relationally. Our next study is going to move from analyzing language in space to rehearsing language in interaction. If linguistic landscape supports teachers in noticing and imagining, multimodal sociodrama gives them a way to rehearse this action. And this matters because many of the moments teachers face around language and identity and belonging happen interactionally. They happen in conversations with colleagues, with our students, with our communities. And these conversations can sometimes be very challenging. So we're going to focus in now on multimodal sociodrama and what is it and how does it work to help teachers practice some of these difficult or challenging conversations even before they enter the classroom. So multimodal sociodrama helps support imagining. You can imagine possible conversations, imagine possible identities, ways that you might engage, and responses even before they happen. They allow you to practice acting by rehearsing principled moves in dialogue with others, first with your co-learners as pre-service teachers, and then later even with co-teachers. And they allow you to return and reflect on what became possible, what was challenging or difficult, and how you might change that to make future action more possible. And as part of this, it requires more than noticing. It helps develop how they understand the way ideologies operate, and again, to humanize or dehumanize. Ways to recognize when deficit ideologies are functioning in a place, and then how to engage in countering those ideologies with others in community and humanely, right? Because when we engage one another with our ideas about pedagogy and how language should operate in a space or how language should be visible in a space, we want to do it collaboratively and in care with one another in kind relationships, not like combatively or in an uncomfortable way. So this allows people to practice how to engage relationally with one another. So multimodal sociodrama is a rehearsal pedagogy. It's focused on engaging this type of ideological inquiry through co-authoring a fictional dialogue. So 2 teachers or 3 teachers or 4 teachers get together and you create a fictional dialogue about something that has been challenging, maybe a tension or a crisis that you experienced or something that you believe in, but you are afraid to put into practice. And you take turns writing this dialogue together in which you try to imagine each different type of perspective that might come into that conversation. The people who want to keep the status quo, the people who want to make the change, the people who are afraid, the people who are excited about it, all the different perspectives. And then again, to reflect on the ways that power functions in discourse, the way our talk shapes reality, and it allows us to live these emotions, experience them, and then reflect upon them. So it allows us to think about talk or discourse both as the object under study and as a tool for learning, as well as a site of affective enactment. So for this study, we have 3 cohorts of participants, all from one institution in the Western US. Spring 2023, winter 2024, and spring 2024. You see, we have a variety of teachers who are pursuing general K-12 license, which in the US means they're going to teach subject areas like math, science, history, and English, language arts, as well as teachers pursuing English as an additional language licensure. And we had teachers in these classes who were also multilingual themselves. That's the last number. So 6 multilingual, 2 multilingual, and 4 multilingual in these groups. We analyzed these data inductively and then deductively. We focused on the emotions we saw in the data. We looked at the scripts that the participants wrote, the dialogues. We listened to the video recordings where they enacted these scripts, and we read their individual reflections. And then we also looked at their same materials for evidence of humanizing pedagogies. And I'll talk about what that looks like here in just a minute. We found that this assignment allowed pre-service teachers to engage in dialogue with multiple others, both their classmates in the class, but also with the imagined communities they set the dialogues within. And that the dialogues help them mobilize affective discursive practices. And through these interactions, they engaged with deficit ideologies in more humanizing ways, allowing them to critique and provide solutions in ways that made them feel more comfortable as colleagues. So I'm going to show you an excerpt from that study. So you can see we're tracing the scripts, the videos, the language they spoke in the video, and how it wasn't exactly the same as the language they wrote down, the reflections and the humanizing elements, engaging in mutual vulnerability, validating emotions, showing compassion, humanizing advocacy. So I'm going to focus in now on one particular interaction. In this moment, 3 participants from the course were discussing about a scene in which the mother of a child who was bilingual had been in a store with her child, and they were speaking Spanish in the store, but someone in the store said to them they should speak English, and it made them feel very uncomfortable. And so they got home, the daughter asked the mother, "Why would somebody say this to us?" And so they followed on with this conversation as parents together. You can see they talked about how it made them feel upset, it made them feel sad and frustrated. And then they talked about how in their reflection, this opportunity to engage in thinking about this helped them to connect the feelings that these mother and child might have had in that moment with the same feelings we get in classrooms when we're told to speak appropriate English, to change our accents, or to use particular terminology or vocabulary associated with a particular type of English. And that they may then affect students' learning in schools, feelings of comfort and growth in schools, and then may even affect our perceptions on assessments. So we could see through this how teachers engaged in becoming more clear politically about the importance of multilingualism in the classroom space, even though the dialogue took place outside of the classroom itself. We could see how they validated their emotions, and they engaged in mutual vulnerability, sharing a very sensitive moment with one another, and then discussing their feelings around that moment. One more example from that script, you can see they followed on again, talking about what do in response to such an action. They talked about how they would have felt shocked and they would have had a hard time coming up with anything to say. And then they proposed potential solutions about what they might do that would be more comfortable for them to share than, maybe something sort of dramatic like fighting back. And they confirmed that any action the mother had taken was strong and valuable action. So their natural choice of words gave them ownership of this kind of identity. It allowed them to feel more authentic than speaking in a formal way. So this was a way for students to put into practice ideas that they were forming in the class, and then imagine what it was like to experience those feelings, and then engage with one another to become more clear on how they understood multilingualism. You could see from the reflection, one of the participants talked about this from her own multilingual perspective, while another participant talked about the ways it increased her awareness that although in the US we were progressing, there were also still people who had beliefs about English and the need to learn and develop English as more powerful, or perhaps the only language accepted in this country, which is a really powerful observation. And she goes on to reflect about how this will help her think about how she wants to make her classroom a more multilingual space. So the reflections from the students, I think, kind of sum this up the most clearly, that stepping into these roles helped them create their scripts. It helped them allow them to practice and experience what kinds of questions might naturally rise up and the kinds of emotions that a person might feel as these kinds of things were unfolding, which in turn helped them think about how they might want to advocate to make their classroom a more multilingual space. We found that multimodal sociodrama allowed them to engage with emotions and embody them in different settings and modalities across different types of texts. And through the video enactment, and again through the reflection, again through rewatching the videos with one another, and through talking about them together in the class after they had gone through this process. The activity let people feel things, and those feelings all led to more humanizing pedagogies engaging in mutual vulnerability, which facilitated meaning making and allowed them to engage in questioning frames that may cause multilingual students to struggle in school. It allowed them to unleash humanistic potential by creating new vulnerabilities, thinking about their own discomfort with the role of English and how they had to think again about if they had been in a position of power, what they might have been unintentionally conveying to their students. And thinking about the role of emotions is actually important in the language classroom, not shying away from them, but actually helping them as teachers and helping their students as well. It's common for us to want to avoid these kind of things, but actually thinking about empathy in effective ways allowed the students to propose thoughtful alternatives to the negative portrayals and practices that they had seen or imagined. And it engaged them with dialogic critical consciousness, allowing them to collectively reflect on social and political conditions that produced inequality for these characters in their scripts and foster action to interrupt and disrupt the kinds of things that they imagined. They carried forward by engaging in actual real actions as well. Students in the class found real resources on campus to share with one another. They invited their families to reflect on these issues. They went to the schools where their children attended and they shared ideas with the teachers in this space. And so all of this helped not only them in their immediate classroom as they were learning to become teachers, but it also started to change the spaces where they went out and interacted in their current roles. And we believe, hopefully, it will help in their future roles when they enter the classroom full-time as well. So engaging in these kind of conversations about such sensitive ideas about language is very difficult. Research shows that it's very, very hard for us as humans to engage in noticing and move past this, just noticing and naming and move toward action. But by allowing people to fictionalize the scripts, it made it more comfortable for the participants. So this pedagogy of fiction allowed them to engage and extend humanizing potential by feeling what others will feel. And the emotions themselves act as a catalyst for unleashing this humanistic potential and developing more humanizing approaches in turn that will counter dehumanization in the classroom. We believe you have to feel first and then act. So what does this mean for us? It can make action rehearsable. We can practice explaining why multilingualism matters, responding to deficit comments without dehumanizing our students or others. We can practice validating students and families' emotions or fears around the subjects that we teach. We can practice naming language rights, naming language ideologies that operate in our spaces. We can practice trying to advocate. We can try on identities as advocates, as teachers of multilingual students before we need to use those in real time. And we can engage with understanding and deciding for ourselves what actions feel possible, safe, and principled in the context in which we work, because this will be different in different contexts and at different moments in our lives. So what does this mean for me, right? What does this mean for us as teachers? We may not have control of policy or curriculum or our textbooks, but we still make decisions every day. We make decisions about what our students notice. We make decisions about what and how language is valued, about what kinds of expressions are counted in our classrooms, the identities as English speakers that our students can try on, and the small changes that can make learning more just and more joyful in our classrooms. So I want to end this by making this practical for us and thinking about what counts as good language learning, and engaging in relational agency for multilingual possibility does not ask us to ignore the constraints that we always operate within, but emphasize the choices that remain possible inside those constraints. Even small choices shape whether our students experience the classroom as a place where their languages, identities, emotions, and ideas can matter. So we can engage in noticing, not as passive, but as a professional practice, asking ourselves, what language do we see? What languages are our students using? What emotions are we noticing? How are positive emotions attached to our students' learning? When do they feel proud? When do they feel playful? When do they feel curious or confident? And how this is not just a nice moment for us and for them, but an evidence that the classroom ecology is opening up possibilities for learning. And then engage in naming where the language we see are being treated as valuable, and when we are able to say, this is not just a poster, but this is a message about belonging and about how language works in my classroom. This is not just a student using their other languages to connect to my content area. This is meaning making. This is not just a difficult conversation. This is language ideology that I'm becoming visible and I'm advocating against. Naming helps us as teachers stand on our professional knowledge and be clear about our intentions rather than just acting on intuition. We can engage in imagining as a design practice by acting small shifts. It doesn't require changing dramatically or changing everything. It begins with one lesson, one piece of our lesson, one question, one display, one option, or one moment where students are invited to engage by using their full meaning-making resources. This is an opportunity for the classroom to become a space of language and grammar, but also play. When we imagine together, we can try out other possibilities for participation and our identity. And then it involves acting in community, not by being a lone hero, right? But as making mutual decisions with our colleagues, with our families and communities, and even with our students at an age appropriate way. Acting like this can be quiet, it can be very small, or it can be large and highly visible. It can be a redesign, a conversation, or a question, a moment, or a decision to create space for students to participate differently than the textbook asks. The important point is that the move is principled and based on our convictions as teachers and our knowledge as educators. And then finally, we can return. And this is so important because we need to look at what we've changed and how this has affected and how it resonates in the community around us. Sometimes a move works beautifully, and sometimes it's not so perfect. Sometimes we did not say what we wish we had said. And sometimes the right action only becomes clear to us later. After we think about the relationships and the conditions one more time, this moment of returning helps us to identify what goes well, what went well because of the change we made, but also to notice moments where we would like to change further or enact further change without treating any one moment as final. And so I would like to invite you to think about 2 practices that you might try in your own classroom, whether that's in your language classroom as an English language teacher or a subject area teacher, or whether that's in your language teacher classroom as a teacher educator. Investigate the language in your school, in your neighborhood, in your textbooks, in your websites, or in your classrooms, and ask, what languages do you see? What is missing? Who is there? And what does this communicate? And what could we redesign to make the purposes for the language that we're here to learn more present in this classroom? And also perhaps multimodal sociodrama. Rehearse an interaction that might be hard for you around fairness, around belonging, around culture, around the environment, around what should we say to one another? How might it feel to engage in that conversation? What choices do we have in making change to better the space that we all share here together, whether it's a very small space or the whole globe, right? And then what would action in community look like? These two practices, I think, are very flexible. They can happen in any context, and they can allow you to make theory or make language practical because we engage in noticing, naming, and imagining, acting, and then returning to reflect again. So, as language teachers, I'd like to finish by saying, we are teaching all the time. We are deciding all the time. We are making decisions about language, about identity, about belonging, what to make visible, what to challenge, what to redesign, and what to return to. The decisions are small, but they are not insignificant, and they help shape our classroom ecology. They shape who our students become and who we are as teachers and as colleagues, and they shape how we become to see ourselves not only as implementers of curriculum, but as designers of multilingual possibility. So I want to thank you so much for your time and for allowing me to share some of this work. And I'd like to invite discussion and questions. And I would like to invite you all also to please keep in touch with me if you would like to get in contact. I'm going to stop sharing my slides so that I can see the chat and so that I can see you all.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Warren. Such very amazing presentations. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the discussion and question and answer session. For the participants who would like to ask some questions, you may raise your hands or simply type your question in the chat box. And before asking the question, kindly introduce yourself briefly and mention your name and also your institutions. Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'm going to read the first question from the chat box first while waiting for those for the participants who would like to ask to Dr. Amber directly. Okay. So this is the very early question, Dr. Amber. So we have it in the chat box from Ibu Rita Hartati. So the question is, since students have different learning tendencies such as visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, how can multimodality integrated with a neurodominance approach enhance students' engagement and effectiveness in English language learning? And she also has an additional question, actually. Okay, the next one. Okay. Still from Ibu Rita Hartati. The next question is, we have also implemented a similar learning approach through student-produced projects such as the role play, videos, mini dramas, short stories, and other creative multimodal assignments. So the question is, how can this multimodal emotion-based learning approach be further developed to enhance students' critical thinking, communication skills, and emotional engagement in higher education classrooms? Okay, that's our first question, Dr. Amber.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for those questions. So I think the power or one power of multimodal activities like this is that the different learning tendencies that our students may have can allow us to be flexible with the assignments. So because there are so many different modalities involved or potentially involved, they can write the script, they can act out the script, they can, we can invite them to draw instead of writing a script. They could, or instead of acting it out, they could draw out the scenes and someone else could act it out, or someone else could write in the words. Because it's flexible in this way, it allows multiple entry points for all participants so that people can lean into their strengths and participate equally with everyone having an opportunity to engage in this activity. And also because it can challenge us to stretch ourselves through modalities that may not be our strength, but which are still communication modes that we encounter in daily practice. And so then as educators, it becomes our responsibility to recognize the diversity of ways that our participants are engaging in multimodal representation and to design our assessments accordingly so that we are not valuing one of these modalities more strongly than another, but we are making opportunities for whichever avenues of expression our participants are using, that those can be used to assess their learning about the topic adequately and appropriately. So that's the important thing, I think, for us as teachers or as teacher educators engaging in these kinds of material activities and multimodal activities, is also to follow through with that with our assessments. Let's see, and back to the second question.
Yeah, the second question still from Ibu Rita Hartati. Yes.
Further developing the multimodal and emotion-based learning approaches, I think that it's a process, right? And so when we first start out, maybe it's just getting students comfortable with the idea of engaging with this practice at all. And then as we develop that practice, we may give them particular scenes or scenarios or contents that we would like them to try out so that they can deepen critical thinking about particular aspects of the learning that we would like them to think more deeply about. For instance, in our project, my colleague and I gave the participants the content ideas that they should think about in the scripts that they designed, and then they wrote the scripts using any perspective that they wanted to, but they needed to include ideas from the readings and the lectures in those scripts. And so by asking them not just to come up with a scene, but to come up with a scene that represents the content we had been reading and thinking about, we had them engage more deeply and critically with these concepts, right? And so similarly, you could do that in a language classroom as well with the language content that you were teaching. If it was just about whatever the content is, you could ask them to engage with that as well. So more critically that well. And similarly, communication skills and emotional engagement, I think you need to teach communication skills, especially about relationality sometimes, like maybe more and less effective ways to advocate. But also, I think we naturally come to this very sensitive and attuned to polite ways to engage in difficult conversations that are culturally relevant to our contexts, right? And so what I found over time using this practice is actually that the teachers almost never engage in these dramas in ways that would be emotionally uncomfortable, but they are almost always very sensitive and very attuned to what others would be feeling. And they attempt to bring the characters who are playing the negative positions or the bad actors in the scenarios, they attempt very hard to show kindness to them and then offer them alternative perspectives to help them understand more deeply and richly, again, drawing on that content knowledge. And so I've actually found that while you could teach advocacy practices explicitly, some of the most sensitive and realistic dialogues are natural formations that we would choose to use as speakers of and cultural users of the language in that content. So does that help answer the question a little bit?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for the answer, Dr. Warren. I think we have another question here from one of our students. Okay, from Nadia. All right, you can unmute yourself and then, oh yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. My name is Nadia. I'm from Unsri, Universitas Sriwijaya. So I want to ask that when, as a teacher, when we are teaching, basically in Indonesia, English is not our first language. Can we teach them with the text that maybe as a teacher we afraid that there's this miscommunication or difference translation? So I just want to know how to do this. I'm sorry. When using type of that book. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yeah, Dr. Warren?
I'll talk about it from my own context and perspectives, and maybe that you can translate some of these ideas for your context. In the United States, we have English only policy in the state where I live. So even though the US has traditionally allowed multilingualism, the state where I teach, the teachers are required to teach only in English, which is very complicated for the multilingual students. And sets a false dichotomy for them sometimes too, because maybe the teacher, she speaks Spanish and English and the students speak Spanish and English, but then they're legally required to use English in the classroom. However, they sometimes take the texts and create dialogues and opportunities for the students to engage more multimodally so that the students can access the material, whereas otherwise the textbook could be too challenging for the students to read because they have only begun learning English just a few months prior to that. But then they're given the classroom textbook with like 5th grade or 9th grade reading level text in it. So they have to translate this material, and the multimodal drama is one way that they take stories in the textbooks and translate it to make simpler sentences that the students can practice using, and then allows them to engage with the content and ideas from the content from the textbook, while also accessing those ideas and yet making the text more accessible to the students. And so this is one way that this has happened. And another way that teachers do this practice in the US is they will pair students up by language acquisition levels. So if students are beginning English, and they might put them in groups with mixed ability levels so that if the students are creating their own dialogues or scripts, they have a community to create the dialogues with that can design the scripts so that they can check their grammar and spelling and understanding. I was talking with one of my students today about this project actually, and he was reflecting on how as a teacher, a pre-service teacher of math actually, who would have multilingual learners in his classroom, one of the things he appreciated was the opportunity to check his own understanding about what the content meant by having a dialogue with his classmates. And so similarly for our K-12 students, the opportunity to create dialogues with each other or to collect language samples with a classmate and work in community allows them an opportunity to check their understanding and to learn from one another. And so these are some of the ways that these multimodal practices are engaged in my context. I hope that might be inspirational or allow you to think of a way that you might transfer or translate some of that to your own setting. But I'd welcome more conversation and more questions related to this.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Warren. Such a very amazing explanations from you. Now, I would like to invite the participants from Zoom meeting. Is there anyone here, participants who would like to Dr. Amber? We can see here that there are some senior lecturers here, professors, and some students from master program in language education, and also students from undergraduate students of English education. Now it's your chance to ask directly to Dr. Warren. Okay, you can simply open your mic and then introduce yourself and also your institution. Anybody?
Excuse me, can I ask a question?
Yes, definitely.
I'm so sorry I cannot turn on my camera.
No problem.
My name is Naisa Raswati. I am the alumni of English Education Program in one of universities in Palembang. So it has been an honor for me to listen to such a fruitful seminar here from Dr. Amber. And I would like to ask you, based on my experience, so I've been teaching in a university where English is taught in 4 semesters, and it is compulsory for every single student there. And I thought one of the student who is deaf and mute, and I was struggling a lot at that time. I tried my best to integrate all multimodality in my classroom, starting from the like integrating Google Speech, video, pictures, and a lot of things there. I am sure that I didn't do my best at that time because I was not experienced enough to create such inclusivity in my class. And one thing that I really want to ask is if I happen to be in that kind of circumstances and in the future, because it is something compulsory in my university to teach the student English, how can I be that sure that I give my students appropriate tests? Because let's say that if it is about teaching, I could integrate a lot of things to optimize the teaching and learning process. But how about the assessment? I hope that you can help me with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, I think that is a very important. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I think the thing that has been the most productive for me is actually to engage the student themselves in talking with them about what they have found to be the most effective way for them to show their learning, and actually use that information while I think about how I want to invite them to share their learning. So that means having an opportunity to communicate with them about what they find effective, what has been successful for them, what has been challenging, and why, and then building on that information as I plan my instruction and then my assessment accordingly. Not watering down the content ever, but only just thinking about how can I make sure that the content is what I'm focused on rather than the mode in which they share it with me, if that makes sense. So making sure that my rubrics or my assessment like criteria are situated very clearly on the content goal and not the way that they have explained the content to me, whether they explain it visually, whether they explain it orally, whether they explain it in writing, whether they explain it in drawing, whether they explain it by using assistive technology, whatever the modality is, whatever the mix of modalities we want to use that is most appropriate for whichever students we have in the classroom. I think the thing that has been the most successful for me has been actually trying to create it more as a co-learning space where I try to understand from them and then we try to go forward together.
Okay, I'm agree with that. Yeah. What about that, Mrs. Nice? Do you have?
What I did so far, I did such kind of interview with all of the lecturers who have been experiencing this kind of condition. And yeah, maybe something that I lost, something that I missed was that I didn't focus on the students itself. So maybe in the future, perhaps I would investigate more on what they expect toward my class, because it was so challenging to make sure that she could pass the objectives, the learning objectives, while I do not make the other students feel left behind. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Yes,
very
thank
much.
you.
Okay, now I would like to offer another chance to the participants from Zoom meeting. Is there anyone who would like to ask another question to Dr. Warren? Okay. Not yet? Okay, maybe I'm going to read again another question from chat box. Actually, Dr. Warren has already answered it, but maybe you have some additional explanations to that. Okay, the question is from Morada Teti. I don't know whether it is Bapak or Ibu, Mr. or Mrs. All right, then the question is, can we interpret the landscapes by using our own ideologies? What should be the best underlying concepts to interpret landscapes in order to avoid miscommunication? As I know, texts are never neutral at all. Okay, that's the question, Dr.
I think it's a great question. I do think we will always interpret ideologies and landscapes according to our own ideologies. I think that the beautiful thing about the linguistic landscape analysis is that it allows us to make visible for ourselves ideologies that we had like carried with us that we maybe hadn't like acknowledged or named for ourselves. And then in turn, I think it helps us see the way those ideologies connect to wider ideologies related to English or things like this. And then the part about the underlying concepts to interpret the landscapes, I think different perspectives and different questions will help you see different things about language in the landscape. So while we in my project focused on what and theorizing why in order to prompt the pre-service teachers to think then about how they might change, you could instead focus on the arrangements of language, visually, like big and small, is it left to right, right to left, all of these types of things. And that would help you notice different things about the language in this space. And so I think the guiding questions that you set for the participants, whether it's for your K-12 students and you're talking about just noticing, maybe you do linguistic landscape, but you do it like, let's notice all the words that use the letter B because that's the letter we're focusing on this week. Or if you do it for like language teacher educators and language teaching, like I did in my study, and you look for like displays of multiple languages. Thinking about the guiding questions will help the students notice the things that you want them to pay attention to, but also remembering to keep it a little bit open so that they can notice the things that are unexpected that you didn't plan for, which will both help you get more insight into them as learners and as educators, and as well maybe help you refine the assignment as you return to it the next time.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Warren. We have one last question here from one of our students also. It is from Putri Nur Halima. Okay.
All right. So thank you, Dr. Amber, for the presentations. So let me introduce myself. My name is Putri from Universitas Sriwijaya. So before I give the main questions, I would like to give the online two background issues. So the first issue concerns educational policy. So in Indonesia, many private schools require the exclusive use of English throughout all the learning process. So through the study of the linguistic landscape, a teacher begins to recognize that the Indonesian language are being marginalized within the classroom. So in the response, the teacher attempts to practice a multilingual approach by using the social drama that you have explained before. And then for the second issue is the cultural. Maybe many students in Indonesia think that local language are bad or uncool. So they see English as the modern, so they prefer English even more. And then with this context in mind, I have two questions actually. So the first, does the training really prepare the teacher to act or just make them aware without any power to change the school rules? And then the second, based on the culture issue, what can actually the teacher can do so the student can stay fluent in Indonesia and proud of being the local language? Thank you so much.
All right. Okay, thank you very much for. There are two questions, Dr. Warren.
I think this is very complex context. Although it's not the same at all, it resonates so much with my own context and with the context in Turkey from my study there. Like I was explaining in my state, we have English only policy. The students must be assessed in English. The teachers are asked to use only English. There's very little room in the classroom for the home languages. And this English medium instruction is very familiar to me in other contexts where I've worked at. That has been the case as well. And yet, as you note, there's actually a lot of power in making connections between the target language and one's other language knowledge, other linguistic knowledge. The multimodal sociodrama allows you to rehearse different options or opportunities for thinking about how to introduce the value of multilingualism and making multilingual connections, and to find a path that feels comfortable and appropriate for you in your context. And that's where it becomes very specific. What that looks like in each different context will be different for each context and will be different for each person in that context. What I feel confident doing in my current career phase versus what I felt confident doing as a first-year teacher was not the same thing. And so the multimodal sociodrama also lets you explore those differences and rehearse different ways that you might engage. It may or may not actually allow you to change things depending on where you work and how it goes when you engage in those conversations. But it will allow you to practice finding a conversation that feels right to you, that feels safe to you, that feels like it works in your context for you, rather than taking like abstract advice about what it is you should do, or coming with theory. If theory won't be an effective explanation, maybe test scores would be a more effective explanation, or maybe pride and community would be a more effective explanation. So it lets you travel these paths and imagine what it might look like if you take one of these as the stance or the other as the stance. So it's very complex. It's very complex here. It really is as well. So I understand and empathize with that really greatly. For me, I've found that sometimes in the US, thinking about the assessment and the value of connecting to linguistic practices multilingually can be compelling, but not always. But sometimes it can be helpful to think about not just this is a case of in the classroom we learn English and I would like them to use their home language, but in the language classroom we are learning how language is constructed to make meaning and do messages and communicate with one another, right? And so making connections about how language works, all languages work, is an effective practice for furthering students' language knowledge. And so making an argument like that has been effective for me here in the US in some contexts. But again, this is something that has to be contextualized, and that's what I think the value of multimodal sociodrama is, that it lets you try out those different possibilities and envision how that would go in your context to find the most comfortable way. I've forgotten your other question. I'm so sorry. Can we, what was the topic
The second
again?
question. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so the second questions based on the cultural issues. So in Indonesia, actually, students think that the local language are bad, so they they prefer to use English even more. And then we, as the teacher, do you have any suggestion for us about what can the student actually do so my students stay can fluent in Indonesia and proud of their.
That reminded me so much of the Turkish context and that study. The teachers are English teachers, and they have a national language, a national Turkish language policy. And yet some of the participants in the study were actually native Syrians. They were native from other contexts. There was a native Russian speaker, somebody from Kazakhstan, some different contexts like that. And so actually the linguistic landscape study and looking at the different languages and their roles in the space actually helped some of those teachers bring forth the linguistic backgrounds from their own experiences and lives in ways that they had never shared before. It's not usually actually even shared in the classrooms what languages they speak, if they speak languages other than Turkish and English. And because they engage in this activity, they began to use that language to notice what those languages were then doing in the spaces they investigated, so they could draw on that linguistic knowledge, and that gave them something about the language to talk about in the classroom. And then it gave them an opportunity to have pride and show their knowledge of that language in the classroom in a powerful way that in turn helped inform their comfort and feeling about their own language and identity. And actually the multimodal sociodrama has been used, I've used it in a context in Turkey as well, with a similar result. People reflected afterward on their linguistic background that they hadn't shared in the classroom prior to that they now had thought about it differently because they had this conversation about allowing languages or not allowing languages in their public space. So I think by building on our natural inclination to notice and theorize about how language works that we all have from infancy, really, and then making it a deliberate pedagogical practice, we can open up opportunities for people to consider the possibility of sharing some of their linguistic knowledge and observations in the classroom, and then coupled with like a welcoming classroom ecology where you consistently make it clear that you believe all languages matter in that space, and you maybe draw connections, maybe just a quick connection orally, right? Not a written down one or a bilingual textbook or anything like that if you don't have that opportunity, but maybe just a quick oral connection. Oh, this word reminds me of this other word in this other language I know, right? Then other students, the students in your class may come to begin to engage in those types of practices as well. Very small, very, very small and quiet, but it allows them to see the way you use multiple languages to make sense of the world and invites them into the opportunity to do the same. So just as a way to get started.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Warren. So I do agree that all language matters, right, based on the context. All right, so thank you very much, Dr. Warren, for the engaging discussion and also thoughtful questions from all participants. Unfortunately, due to the time limitations, we must conclude the discussion session here. So Dr. Warren's discussion on multimodality, critical multilingual awareness, and also linguistic landscapes inquiry. Another one also, multimodal sociodrama, has already provided us with meaningful perspective on how language teachers' educations can become more socially responsive, reflective, and also transformative. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all the committee and all participants, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to Dr. Amber Warren for her enlightening presentation and valuable contributions to our academic community. So we sincerely hope that this session inspires further reflections, research, and innovations in language teacher educations. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, we officially conclude today's public lecture discussion session. Thank you very much, Dr. Warren. Thank you, everyone. And I would now like to return the session to the Master of Ceremony. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Aprilia, for handling the main sessions and amazing explanations from Dr. Warren. We're very pleased to hear that. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the presentations of e-certificates from the chair of the organizing committee to our speaker, Dr. Warren. Please welcome Dr. Sari and Dr. Warren.
Thank you so much, Amber, for being here with us. Very generous with your time as well as sharing your upcoming work. This is a certificate of appropriation from us. Thank you again. I'm looking forward to reading your upcoming articles. It's so exciting. And the two studies that you share with us are very inspiring. We're looking forward to having another connection with you through works and research in the future. So again, thank you so much, and this is for you. I'll send it to your email.
Thank you so very much. I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to speak with you all today. I've greatly appreciated it, and I hope that we have many future opportunities for connection and collaboration between myself and our two institutions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's public lecture of the Master Program in Language Education at KIP Universitas Sriwijaya. On behalf of the committee, we thank all distinguished guests, speakers, moderators, students, and all of participants for your valuable presence and contributions. When I open it with pantun, let me close with pantun as well. The day has passed with joy and light, sharing knowledge along the way. Thank you for all joining us today. See you again another day. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Amber. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.